Okay, the following is an interview with an accomplished psychologist with an extensive academic training and work experience. Our guest has received a Doctor of Philosophy in Psychology with an emphasis in clinical psychology and a specialization in health psychology from the APA-accredited Fielding Graduate Institute in Santa Barbara. She also holds a Master of Arts with an emphasis in clinical psychology from the same institution, as well as a Master of Science with an emphasis in counseling psychology and specialization behavior therapy. Health psychology from Lutheran University in Thousand Oaks, Cal Lutheran University. I said that a little bit off there, but she also obtained a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology from the University of California, UCLA, right?
Yes.
UCLA. Our guest has a wide range of work experience, including serving as a staff psychologist at the California State Prison of Los Angeles, which is going to be a lot of stories I'm sure we're going to have fun with, and where she provided psychotherapy to mentally ill inmates in various programs. She also worked as a clinical manager and a clinical director at Aegis Medical Systems and in integrated behavioral services, respectively, where she supervised personnel, provided treatment planning, specialized counseling, and educational protocols, and implemented relapse prevention planning. She also worked at Vericare Management, where she conducted assessments of skilled nursing facility patients and developed appropriate treatment plans. Moreover, our guest has worked as a program coordinator, clinical psychologist at Hillview Mental Health Center, and as a postdoc mental health clinician at San Fernando Valley Community Mental Health Center. In the former role, she provided individual therapy for chronically mentally ill community clients, created and developed wellness programs, and facilitated psychoeducational and process groups. In the later role, she provided mental health, domestic violence, and substance abuse education, assessment referral, case management, and related services. She also works as an FFA Social Work Supervisor at Penny Lane, where she supervised social work staff and ensured compliance with regulatory requirements. So, joining us today, Dr. Jodi Larman. Thank you so much for doing this. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it and how excited I am to do this interview. So, you're actually doing a podcast of your own.
Yes.
All right. Tell us about that. I love the name of your podcast too. So,
I have a podcast with two other women. It is called Why Complain When You Can Whine, WINE.
Who came up with that name?
Me, of course. It is making sense of the senseless, three professional women attempting to make sense of toxic nonsense while drinking wine. So that kind of gives you an idea of it does get more fun as the night goes on.
Yeah, wine does have that thing to,
Yes, it does.
what's it called? What is the word
Loosen
that
you
used?
up,
Yeah.
uninhibited.
Toxic, what was that phrase that you just used a moment ago?
Toxic nonsense.
Right, both kind of go one hand in hand, right? So, all right, so if anybody gets a chance, make sure you get to watch that podcast. I've watched it a few times, and it definitely has a lot of great information, and it's fun to see what you guys do and the chemistry you have between your co-hosts.
If I can say, it is on YouTube, it is on Audible, it is on Spotify, it is on iHeartRadio, and it is in Google Podcasts.
Okay.
So no excuse not to find it.
Well, what we're going to do is we're going to put a link underneath this channel, and then we'll click into every one of those a little bit later on once we post it up, so we'll have to see. But first and foremost, you are an incredibly accomplished psychologist. And so part of what I want to interview about is not just the fact that you're a psychologist or that you have such a breadth of experience, but what it takes to be successful. Those elements seem to have common denominators in all fields, like if somebody's successful in sports or somebody's successful as a lawyer, and then you as a doctor in psychology. What are those common denominators? How did you become so successful? And with other people that are coming up, how they can kind of emulate or use your path as a way to make it easier for them, hopefully. But so let's just start from the beginning. Who was your dad? Who was your mom? How did you grow up? And we'll work our way into what made you choose psychology.
My parents are actually, they're both deceased. My mom and dad passed away in 2002 and 2003 respectively, but they were my parents were the type of parents that, this is the envelope. You can push it, but you can't burst through it. I mean, they were supportive. I talk about unconditional love a lot, and unconditional love is when it's between parent and child, and you're only going to find it between parent and child. And that is where I may not like the things that you do. I may not think they're the wisest choices, but no matter what, I will always, always love you. There are no conditions to my love. And again, I may not like it, but I will always love you and always try to guide you toward the better decisions, but I'll let you fly on your own. I'm not going to let you crash too hard, but sometimes you got to crash. And my parents were the type that they supported literally anything that we wanted to do or become, as long as it was morally and ethically and legally okay. My
so drug
dad
dealing was out of the question?
No, yes, that was out of the question. But my dad was always like, when I also went to the American Academy of Dramatic Arts at one point and wanted to sing. I took singing lessons, and my dad he bought equipment and he tried to make contacts because he used to manage bands before when I was very little. And so he was like, okay, let's do this. And then when I stopped doing it, he was like, okay. You know, it wasn't like, are you serious? He was the type that my sister and I were in drill team. We were very close. We're 19 months apart, a grade apart, and they were drill team parents. My mom, we played softball, and our softball manager just walked out one day and left the team high and dry. And my mom, with no experience, was like, okay, I'll take over. Yeah, so she was the coach. My parents were always there when there were chaperones that were needed. My parents were always there. And growing up, you're kind of like, my parents were always there. But as you get older, you see that it's like, my parents were always there for us. And that was like the best thing. I was the middle child. I am the middle child. And so it wasn't always, I'm just like my mom, which isn't always a good thing. So, I did get the brunt of discipline. I'm going to say it. My mom did hit. My mom did hit us. And as she got older, she was only 21 when she had my sister, and sure. 22, because she had just turned 22. Oh my God, no, I'm lying. My mom was, I think, 19 when she had, anyways, or 20, just turned 21, and 22 when she had me. And so she was young. My brother came 5 years later, but my mom admitted later on when we were older that she's like, wow. She goes, nowadays that would be considered child abuse.
I was just about to say that.
Yeah.
Like a lot of times, I think if you're a child of the 80s or earlier than that, then hitting was, even in schools they had corporal punishment at that time.
There was a paddle hung up on the wall, yeah.
But I think nowadays, things have evolved or changed, but I think
well, back then also, like I did a report in 10th grade on child abuse, and it was a group report, and I got physical. And it was things like putting people put their kids on the hot stove and burned them. Oh, yeah, gosh. Like now we'd go, whoa. But that was child abuse, not spanking on the butt or spanking in general. Now you don't spank. There's other ways. And so like my mom could throw a shoe at a 90-degree angle and hit you wherever you were. That kind of, my mom wasn't like abusive in that, burning us and stuff like that. Sure. But it was like, what is it they say? We're not Hispanic, but the chanclas and the whatever that parents can throw when they get mad. My mom was that.
Gotcha.
So, but they were, and I always had to get the last word in, which.
So your mom and your dad, they had a pretty much equal role in terms of your childhood, or was there one that you more connected with, or one that more guided you or propelled you into where you went?
Basically, I had really good relationships with both my mom and dad. I was very close to both of them in a different way. And my dad and I would say that he has different relationships with all three of his kids and connects with them differently. And because my sister went and graduated college, and then she went and got married. And my brother's really intelligent, but not the school type.
Sure.
But if my brother wants to know something, oh my God, he'll blow you out of the water with the stuff that he knows.
Yeah.
But my dad was always the make lemonade out of lemons and then plant the seeds, make a tree, and then give lemons to all your friends so that they can now make their own lemonade. My dad was the type that everybody liked him wherever he went. And I was a lot like him. Not that everybody liked me wherever I went, but like the whole I was a social butterfly.
Sure.
And so we connected. And then when my husband passed away, and then when my mom passed away, he and I connected in a whole different way because my husband passed away before my mom passed away. So it was this whole other level of understanding and life and stuff like that. So both parents I was close to, but differently.
Sure. So you would say that you had a pretty good childhood then with your mom and dad?
You know, it's funny because I always feel that way. And this is where I don't get the whole, you don't blame your parents at this point. You're grown-up adults.
Right.
You know, at a certain point, you can't help it. But then when you get to a certain point, you're a grown adult.
Sure.
But I was reading through my journals, and I was telling my sister, I'm surprised my sister and I are friends. Because in my journals, I was always getting in trouble because of her. We were always fighting, and I was always getting beat, and I hated my parents throughout my teenage journals. So I'm like, did I have a good childhood? But then it's also perception.
Sure.
And even if you discipline your kids, if you're there for them, it doesn't excuse it, but there's different rapport and relationships and all that. And you can have supportive parents and think that your childhood was horrible. Yeah. And you can have a dysfunctional family and your childhood was great.
So as a psychologist, when you're dealing with clients that have had bad childhoods, do you have a point where it's hard to relate, or how does a psychologist that doesn't necessarily share the same life experience as their client be able to make the connection, empathize, sympathize, and then create an environment where a solution can happen?
It's interesting because sometimes having the same type of life experience isn't a good thing. And other times it's a good thing, a better thing. Like, you know, I know I'm jumping around, but I was in a toxic relationship. So even before that, I could understand, I could relate in a certain way, but now I am far more empathic and like, okay, I know the signs, I know what happened, I know why, not why this happened, but how it happened. Whereas in the past, before this, I didn't necessarily know that. So sometimes it really helps to have the same experience, but other times it doesn't. Like working in the narcotic treatment program, I've never had a drug addiction. So it's like, well, how can you relate? Well, because there's other things besides drugs that people can be psychologically addicted to.
Sure. Yeah.
And sometimes physically addicted, mainly drugs and alcohol. But
well, I definitely want to get into the grief and of the loss of your husband, and I also want to get into your toxic relationship at some point. But before we get to that, I wanted to kind of delve into what made you choose psychology and make that commitment to, pursue a doctorate. And I mean, you really want the whole. I don't know if 9 yards is even a reasonable length to describe it, but so what made you choose psychology, and how did you end up doing it?
It's funny because when I was 9 years old, I remember, I'm Jewish, I was at Temple, and in the Temple parking lot, it was all Cadillacs. And for some reason, I still remember this 9-year-old me wanted to be a doctor because they had Cadillacs.
It's a good reason.
I don't like Cadillacs. My parents had Cadillacs, and I don't want a Cadillac now, so I have no idea what 9-year-old me was thinking. But when I went to college, I wanted to be a general practitioner, or an internist, I guess it would be. And when I was in high school, I skipped a grade and a half. I was always in honors classes, and I graduated at 16. I didn't study. I mean, that was another thing. I rarely studied. Nowadays, though, wow, when you got 13-year-olds in medical school or graduating medical school. But I rarely studied. And my friends were cutting school, and my mom was like, as long as you're getting A's, I'll sign your absence slips. Well, I only applied to UCLA because that runs in our blood. We bleed blue and gold. And like I said, my brother, who didn't go to college, is an SC fan. So what does that tell you? But so I applied to UCLA, and that was it. That was all. And when I got accepted, I had just turned 17. I was into partying. I was taking chemistry and calculus and biology, and I was a little sister in a fraternity, and I was raiding the fraternity at 5 a.m. with donuts at Kahlua on the day of a calculus midterm. So I suddenly realized I had to study, and I found that out when I took the calculus exam, and I got a C on it. And for the first time ever, it was like I got test anxiety. Really bad. Like I had a tutor in calculus, and I would study can I cuss?
Yes.
My ass off. And I would go in to take the test and panic and just go blank and completely like lose myself and walk out and be like, okay, that was it. Why did I not know this? So I ended up going to UCLA Student Psych Services, and I could only go twice, but they did systematic desensitization, which is taking you through relaxation and then levels of stressful situations. In my case, it was test taking, and starting out with levels of first you're getting the book, and however anxious you are, you work through that, and then you're imagining you're opening the book, and then studying all the way up to taking the test and the things that you do. So I went there twice, and then my grades really suffered, and I don't like to admit this, but I was asked to kindly leave
Oh my God.
because my grades after a year and a half, I had a 1.9 GPA.
Okay.
So I decided, okay, I have to do something. So I went to the American Academy of Dramatic Arts on a whim. I auditioned, got in, and I knew there was always something missing in my life. And that was every summer when people were graduating, I knew that was what was missing. And I went back to UCLA because that was the only school I ever wanted to go to. So I'll be damned if my husband at the time I got married in between, and my husband was like, go to CSUN. We're really close. And I'm like, no, I am a Bruin. I will graduate a Bruin if it's the last thing I do. And I went to extension, and I got the grades that I was supposed to needed to get back into UCLA. And from then on, all I did was study. And I started taking psychology classes, and I was like, wow, this is me. I fit. This wasn't like I have to learn this. It was like, this is what I was meant to be. And I don't know if this is a good thing to admit, but physical wounds can heal. They really can. Sometimes without treatment. Emotional and mental wounds, they can last forever. And without treatment, they probably will. So I thought that, plus I can mess with your mind.
That had a benefit.
That was, I'm not going to lie. It's like, I can mess with I used to tell my inmates, not only am I licensed by the state to mess with your mind, I am hired by the state to mess with your mind. But so I just
have an Hannibal Lecter in my head. Now I'm nervous. But
yeah, so I really, really, really loved psychology. And once I graduated with my bachelor's, I was like, now what?
So did you have an emotional or a psychological episode where you felt like psychology helped explain something and then it connected with you? Or just as a subject, you felt that it was something that you just could work?
Both, because going to UCLA Student Psych Services and seeing how much it helped me, because when I went back to school, I used all those techniques that I learned. And when I was taking my first exams, I would tell people, okay, if I do this, just pat me on the back, just tell me to breathe, just tell me to relax, and that kind of stuff. And that helped me get through to graduate, and still does when I'm working with clients. I help them now. Also, it just resonated. I mean, it was just something like, this makes so much sense. How can people not be understanding this?
Right.
Like, I understand that it is a science, although people will argue with you, but it is a science. But it's like, how do people not get this? To me, it's totally common sense.
Yeah.
But I'm glad that it's not to everybody, because that's why I have a job.
So you mentioned how emotional damage can sometimes be difficult to heal. Prior to doing psychology, did you have an experience like that where there was something that just wasn't healing and it drew you to the psychology, or you were just enthralled with the subject itself, it sounds like?
A lot of people do go into it because of their own past trauma. I don't believe that I mean, I really don't. I know that a lot of my stuff, I was always, you know, how do you explain it? The one that would do all the work and never get the credit. That is the story literally of my life, dating back to high school. You know, we were applying, trying out for drill team, myself and another girl for drill team captain, and you have to try out together. And she drew up everything, but I was the choreographer. I did all the plans, and they picked her and not me. And they said, well, you know, she did a great, you know, choreography. And I'm like, well, that was me.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, when I played Little League for the All-Stars, they didn't know who I was. And our manager's daughter was on the team. So when they asked, who was that? She used her daughter's name. So her daughter got picked. So I was always on this, you know, okay, pick myself up, brush myself off, and it's okay. Resilience.
It does take strength.
Resilience.
But it clearly has got you to high places. So that's a great thing on that end. So one of the things that really came out on your resume, of all the long list of things that you've done, is working in a jail. And
Prison.
So, prison, that's right.
Yeah.
State prison.
Yes.
All right, so tell us about that experience, and maybe something that really stuck out to you in terms of somebody that you did help, or what makes some of the prisoners just not be able to be rehabilitated at all. So, so what was it like? What was that like?
I didn't start out in the justice system direction. I wanted to work in the medical health direction, but because of life circumstances, because in all of psychology, 99% of it, if you're doing clinical work, you're going to be on call, and I couldn't do that. And my dad had always told me, work in the prisons. The pay is really good. And I'm like, it's prison. Well, I decided to apply because, yes, the pay is really good. Yes, the benefits are really good if you can get a state job. And so I applied, and there was just something where, you know, when you go somewhere and you're like, this is a fit. I'm going to do okay here. Because at the same time that I applied there.
Of course, that would be the place.
I applied at like Department of Mental Health jobs with the county, and I got offered 4 jobs while I was waiting for the background check for that and a juvenile justice position in Ventura County while I was waiting for my background check. And they were telling me, okay, well, you're not really going to like prison. You're not. So in about 6 weeks, you know, just let us know and you can have this job. And I'm like, no, I'm going to stay for at least a year. And 13 years later, I industrial retired because I got hurt. Otherwise, I'd still be there. But I honestly really enjoyed my job, which is weird to say. You enjoyed working at prison. I did.
Because you did deal with actually the worst of the worst.
We are. It's a level 4 prison, which is the highest level in the state of California. It's electrified fence. We don't have at CSP LAC, so California State Prison, Los Angeles County, we don't have a death row. But we had, I had a couple inmates on my caseload that got commuted from death row. Their sentences were commuted and they were sent down to general population. But we have rapists, murderers. By the time you get to a level 4, you've either done one crime that was really bad, or you have in succession worked your way up to a level 4 by doing really bad things, really heinous crimes.
So how does a person that's first brought into a level 4 prison, how do they acclimate or adapt to, especially if they're not necessarily the alpha type in an environment where maybe that's the only thing that could keep you alive?
Mm-hmm.
How does everybody survive? Or if you're first being placed in a prison like that, what is the advice, or how do these people acclimate into that new environment, that new life?
Well, just by talking to my inmates, when there's a lot of guys that got sent to prison at a young age. And when you're young and you go to prison, you have to prove yourself. So I would have guys on my caseload that had been in prison. They were probably in their mid to late 20s that had already been in prison for about 7 years, maybe, and in trouble, in trouble because you have to fight. You have to either fight to get ahead or fight to save your life. Because when you're young, you're fresh meat. And again, you have to prove that you're not a little kid, that you are tough, that you can take prison. So I had guys that, again, they're still young, but they had been stabbed, shanked. They had been in fights. They had been in the hole, in solitary, and write-ups, and more time on their sentence and more time on their sentence, just because they have to prove that they can survive. Because if you don't prove that you can survive, you won't.
That sounds awful. So I'll throw this one at you. Like most recently in the news, we had this kid, Aiden Fucci. Did I pronounce that right? And I think he stabbed the cheerleader. I think he did it when he was 16 years old.
Is he the one that was in the back seat of the car texting or
yes,
doing
exactly. Yeah. And he recently was found guilty and sentenced. And they did not even wait to take him to the adult prison. They pretty much within 10 hours, as soon as he was convicted and sentenced, they took him, and I think he's 18 now or 16. I'm not quite sure what his age is now, but regardless of the fact, he still was a little kid, not a little kid, but
a juvenile.
A juvenile when he committed the crime, and now he's going to be sent to this state penitentiary where the monsters are. And what are they telling him? How is he going to adapt to this new life where he's really going to be placed in an incredible position here?
As far as what are they telling him, as far as whom? Like, he'll be in reception center. Well, if I can only speak for the state of California.
Sure.
We have reception center. So you go to the county jail until you're processed through, and then they'll send you. At the time, we were the only reception center in Southern California. I think maybe Donovan had a reception center, but in up until San Diego, we were the only reception center, and there was one in Central California. So we got all of LA County Jail, and anything near LA County Jail, you get processed through. No matter who you are, you have to go through a reception center. You just don't go straight into prison. You go to reception center, you get screened for mental health. At least in California, you get screened for mental health. You stay in reception center either 3 days until they send you somewhere else, or they'll keep you in our prison. But either way, you go from reception center to a building of other reception center guys, and then after so much time, they put you, if they know you're staying, depending on the length of your sentence, you get into general population. Once you're in general population,
anything goes.
Yeah.
Huh. So this kid, Aiden Fucci, he did this, like, it's an unconscionable crime to think that. And the amount of times he stabbed the girl is just obscene. And what is that? Like, for a 16-year-old or teenager to commit that type of a crime, what is his psychological disposition? Or if you had to analyze it from a distance, is it just him being a psychopath? Is it just, and one of the psychologists actually said, during the testimony is this is a unique case where he doesn't think he can be rehabilitated in any way. And part of the reason why the judge, I think, slammed the life sentence on him. But so what do you think? What is it that, if you had to profile him psychologically, what is it that made him do that or created this type of a monster, really?
I cannot honestly speak about him because I don't know that much about him, but I can tell you in general, this is the type of thing. There's something called antisocial personality disorder. Antisocial personality disorder is a blatant general disregard of society, of human rights, of people, of laws, and all of that. Most people in prison have antisocial personality disorder. Not all, but a good percentage of people have antisocial personality disorder. However, people think everybody in prison has it. It starts at the age, it has to have evidence of conduct disorder before the age of 15. And conduct disorder is basically the same thing. They're in trouble all the time, like what used to be called juvenile delinquents, always getting in trouble. So by the time they get to prison, after the age of 18, they have a long juvenile history of getting into trouble. So if he has a long juvenile history of getting into trouble, That history doesn't just, okay, now that you committed a crime as an adult and you're going to go to prison and you're going to get out, you're not going to continue, because antisocial personality disorder is a personality disorder. It is basically your trait, who you are.
So, I mean, it probably would not be a stretch to think that this kid was getting into trouble quite a bit prior to this act in the very first place.
I would say it's really going to be rare that somebody commits a crime that heinous and it was premeditated.
Yeah.
That has never, ever, ever, ever showed any signs. And in ASPD, antisocial personality disorder, it's part of the cluster B disorders, which includes narcissistic personality disorder, histrionic personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder, and borderline personality disorder. And they cross over in traits. You can have more than one diagnosis, but you can also have traits of the other three without having the diagnosis. ASPD, you can have, there are a degree of ASPD or that have sociopathy or psychopathy. And unfortunately, those are the ones that are thankfully rare, but at a young age, and even with ASPD, harmed animals, that's a huge sign. Mm-hmm. And it could be even something like pulling wings off of flies, sure. And then you move up to butterflies, and then birds, and then cats, and so on and so forth. But if you ever see anyone that is harming animals, that is a really not good sign.
So is it fair to say that his parents or his network of authority figures weren't paying attention, or they blew it off, or do you feel like in some way his psychopathy could be could have been addressed prior to him doing something like this?
The really sad thing is personality disorders, as with most mental health issues, it's a biopsychosocial, biological, psychological, and sociological component. But somebody that's like a psychopath or a sociopath, I've heard of like 2-year-olds that tried to kill their siblings. And so far, I have not heard of anybody that has been able to be cured. Mm-hmm. And whenever I hear, someone will tell me, well, they're kicking our dog. They already killed one of the kittens that was born. And that's not the only thing they do, but they're really, really problematic. It's like, oh, it's not a good prognosis. And I don't like to say that, but it's like, get them in therapy as soon as possible, because I'm not saying it's a done, dead deal, but get them in therapy. Get them in therapy as fast as you can, because it does not look good.
Hmm. So in your experience when you were at the California, who was the worst one that really took you back and shocked you to an extent?
There was a guy on my caseload who was, I'm going to say probably in his 40s, and he was biracial. And because a hip, I can't give out a lot of information, absolutely. So I do change some of the information, absolutely. But not the main thing. And he and his wife at the time had a child, and then they separated. And she got pregnant with another man, had his baby, and said it was his. And he's like, no, it's not. No, it's not. It's not my kid. Not my kid. And then she went and got a paternity test. And it is his kid. And so he was like, okay, I want to have a relationship with this child. Let's go buy diapers. He was 6 months old at this point. So they went to buy diapers, and she was sitting in the front seat of the car. Mind you, she's pregnant. And his child was sitting in the seat next to him in a car seat. He shot her in the back of the head, and then shot the child, 6 months old, 3 times, point blank in the chest. That one really bothered me because he had no remorse. All he did was say, I didn't do it. I didn't do it. They wanted to put me on death row. I was facing the death sentence. You don't know what that's like. It's like, no, I don't, thank God. But it's like, if I didn't do it and this happened to my child, I would be a puddle on the floor. You'd have to sedate me for me to be able to even function. And he was, just, it wasn't me. And I don't know why they're saying it was me. And just like, it was like, dude, there's no anything there, no feeling to even lead me to believe for the slightest that it wasn't you.
Huh. I've asked police officers this a few times, and it's interesting the type of answers sometimes you'll get back. But being in that environment, like, how did you as a person separate what you were seeing and doing and who you were talking to from your, normal life with your friends? Because obviously, your normal circle of friends not going to be able to relate to the pressures of what you're going through or what you're hearing. There's probably maybe only a handful of people in the world that you could probably sit down and talk to and relate to in regards to what you guys are. So how did you, I don't know if compartmentalize is the correct word, or how did you manage your emotions in terms of how you dealt with what you saw, what you heard, and then come back into a civil society, so to speak, and then just carry on?
There were 2 times. I'll give you 2 examples, but first I'm going to say, I would tell my inmates, I am not here to judge you. You've already been judged. You've been tried and convicted. I'm not here for that. We don't have to read their files with their crimes in it. It really helps. Initially, we used to have to read it because we'd have to put all the information down. And then they said, you don't have to read them anymore. There's no need. But for the most part, a lot of people would read them. I would read them. And then others would I don't even want to know. But I would want to know, because I would want to know also if this person has a propensity for violent outbursts and if somebody else was just in for a drug charge. So not that I'm going to treat them differently, but I may, behaviorally keep a lookout a little more closely for someone who has just spontaneous, like I have, intermittent explosive disorder or something like that. But twice there were times where my son was molested, and I came to work and I asked them, if you know that this person is in for a sex crime, can you please not put him on my caseload right now? Because ethically, I cannot treat them.
Yeah, you have to kind of recuse yourself from that because it's too...
Because I can't. It's like at this point, I would be doing them a disservice. After a while, I ended up on the SNY sensitive needs yards with the protective custody guys, which includes so many child molesters. And at that point, I could, but it is one of those where you have to be like, are you really here for mental health, or are you here to hide out? And they would come to mental health to hide out all the time. They would come crying, I'm scared, I don't know what to do. And it's like, well, so is your victim.
Oh my goodness, yeah. That's got to be a... So... I'm so sorry that you did, because I know you mentioned that your son was molested. And if it's okay with you, I wanted to kind of ask you or delve into your experience with that, and the basic story of how you found out, and then what you did afterwards in terms of pursuing law enforcement. I think so many people probably have these situations, but don't know exactly how to go about it, or are scared to go about it, or sometimes there's shame associated with it. And I want to know how you were able, because you were very definitive in the way that you handled it. You found out, you made sure what was going on, and then you took immediate action. So go ahead, I'll give that mic to you then. Let's share, if you could share the sequence of events that happened and how you got to that point.
My son has developmental disabilities. He is a regional center consumer, and as part of that, we had what's called respite care, and that is like babysitting to give me a break. And it's hard to find a good respite worker, so we had this respite worker for a couple years. It was a male, and my neighbor at the time was a sheriff, and I asked him, do you think it's okay to have a male? This is his age, he's married, and he said, yeah, he doesn't really meet the profile for a typical predator. So he was great. He was great until he wasn't, but he was great, always there when I needed him. He got married, or he was married. His wife got pregnant. We went to the baby shower. But my son, after about 2.5 years, this was March of 2011, my son started like rubbing outside of his pants, outside, not inside the pants, but his crotch area outside of his pants. And I was like, what's going on? And he couldn't tell me. And so he was going to a social skills with a therapist there. And she said to me, he keeps rubbing the outside of his pants. And I'm like, I know, I don't know what it is. It lasted 2 days and then it stopped. And then he started wetting the bed. I'm like, okay, this is regression. What is going on? So I would ask him. And the babysitter, and I'm going to say his name so everybody knows, it's Jeremy Sean Stockton. Stay away. He's still in prison, but he gets out at the end of the 27 or something like that. But he used to give Sean, my son, baths. And so I asked my son again, not leading questions, but I said, when you take a bath, what does Jeremy do? Does Jeremy bathe you at all? And he's like, no. I said, does Jeremy touch you? No. I'm like, okay. What does Jeremy do? He just sits there. And I'm like, okay, he just watches. So I didn't say, does he touch this? Does he touch that? But it's like, show me and tell me. So I'm like, okay, something's not right here, but I can't put my finger on it. And one day I walked into the den and my son had his pajama top on and just his little brief shorts. And he and Jeremy looked like they were going to wrestle. Jeremy's head was going toward his stomach like they were going to wrestle. And I'm like, what's going on? And he's like, oh, we're just playing. I said, Sean, put your pants on. He's like, okay. But it's like, you know, he was 8, but again, he's delayed. So, and I was like, okay, that was a little odd, but not unusual. And 2 weekends later, when Jeremy and I used to sit and talk for a long time after, Jeremy started rushing out of the house. Gotta go, gotta see the baby, gotta get home. And I was like, okay, he just had a baby. Well, one day he leaves and my son calls me, Mommy, Jeremy made it bigger. And I'm like, what? And I go upstairs and my son is holding his penis and he goes, yeah, Jeremy made it bigger. And the hairs on the back of my neck stood up and I'm like, okay, in my head going, don't show emotion. Don't panic. Could be nothing. Maybe it's nothing. I know it's not nothing. Mm-hmm. And I said, tell me what happened. And he goes, well, he pushed it down to make it go up. And I'm like, were you in the bathroom? Because I'm thinking maybe inappropriately he was urinating and it was going somewhere and Jeremy tried to redirect it. Still inappropriate. And he goes, no. And he was telling me to the best of his ability as a little kid what was happening. And I ran and I got my phone and I hit record and I put it down and I'm like, okay, tell me all this. And then he tells me everything. And then he said, and Jeremy said not to tell anyone. And I'm like, okay. And he goes, can I go to bed now, Mommy? I'm like, yep. And I went in my room and I almost vomited, called my neighbor who's a police officer at the time, sheriff's officer, and we talked about it. I played him the recording and it still wasn't like enough. So I asked his school to kind of talk to him. He never said anything. I asked his social skills therapist because they had a whole thing on touching and she said he didn't say anything. And so I told the babysitter not to come because I had also fallen, hurt my back. Don't come. It's no big deal. Mm-hmm. He's like, okay, I just want you to be okay. And then he showed up at my house. And I said, what? I told you that I didn't need you today. And he goes, oh, I didn't get the message. I'm sorry. Okay, no worries. I'll see you later. And my son's like, can he come in? Let him come in. Let him, let's go out with him because we were going out. And I'm like, no. He was testing. Mm-hmm. He knew because why all of a sudden do I not need him on the weekends? But I still didn't know what happened. And so I asked my ex at the time if he would talk to my son and see. And I asked my son, will you talk to him and tell him what happened? He's like, yeah. And I went out of the room. And when I came back in, my ex had the phone. He's like, we're calling the police now. Because he had told my ex more than he told me. And when the police came, he told them more. And we all went down to the scan thing to interview him. And after the interview, 2 of the officers were interviewing him, watching the interview, and one of them came out and he said, I punched the wall. I'm so angry. Because this guy was with the Boys and Girls Club, with the YMCA, and with the regional center, with kids who have special needs. And luckily, it looked like my son was the, for lack of a better description, test case. But what he didn't realize was my son is verbal. And the next morning, the detective called me and he said, you know, I have kids of my own. And I'm waiting for him to say, we don't believe him. And he said, your son was very believable. I believe this. We're going to get him. They got him. He confessed. And like any typical, honestly, predator, he's like, well, he liked it. He was liking it. And it made him feel giddy. It was the most disgusting thing I had heard. There was one other mom who said that her son said that he saw Jeremy's penis, but it was in a bathroom at the park. So we don't know what that is. And we think that my son did stop a lot of it. But the last day that his kid was 6 months old. Hopefully he'll never have a relationship with him. His wife divorced him and everything. But he had the nerve. They gave him a plea bargain.
Oh, wow.
He was facing 60 to 100 years. And the DA does not like to put children on the stand. So they plea bargained to 17 to 20.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
So how were you able to support Sean through the situation, make him understand what happened and the inappropriateness, or was there any additional counseling that he needed, or how did you go about supporting Sean through the process?
See, that was the hardest part because he still didn't understand why Jeremy was never coming back. And they used to watch Pirates of the Caribbean together, and he took the DVD and he goes, so we're going to watch this when Jeremy comes back. And I had to tell him, Jeremy's not coming back. It's nothing that you did. It's nothing that you said. Jeremy did something. He touched you where he wasn't supposed to touch you, and he told you not to tell anyone. And you are so brave, and you and mommy have such a good pact that you told mommy. So he is not in trouble because you told. He is in trouble because he did something that he was never supposed to do. And I would keep reinforcing that. When we got a new babysitter, my son didn't want to go in the den with the babysitter because I guess that's where stuff happened. It happened in my room, it happened in the bathroom, but he didn't want to go in the den because that's where they used to watch movies. And he was very, very sad, and it broke my heart. He would be taking a bath and just kind of, he more missed what he thought was his friend. And so it was hard for me to tell him it was wrong, but it wasn't your fault. And it wasn't anything that you did, because I know Jeremy told you to keep it a secret. And you were so brave. And even they gave him a tour of the court. They gave him a tour when he came to the police station. They were like, he's a hero. And it was to the point where he was like, I know, because everybody played up what he did to put someone that was a bad person, that did bad things. I had to go to therapy more than he did. But I constantly would be like, are you okay? Do you want to talk about it? And even now, someone got upset with me because I was telling the story, and they said, it's not your story to tell.
Yes,
And I said, well, yeah, it is. And also, my son knows, because I have talked to him about it and asked him if it's okay for me to tell the story.
What a ridiculous statement.
But my son doesn't remember that he tells me, thankfully. So that's, I guess, the one benefit of his disability.
How old was he when this happened?
He was chronologically 8, but mentally probably about 5, 4.
So did he have any long-term issues after the fact? Did he need any therapy?
No, and I would ask him, because he was still going to his social skills therapy and stuff. So to him, it was just like, okay. I was really worried once he hit puberty, because some of the things that he had said, I was worried that it would trigger it. And I was prepared to, at that point, take him to therapy. But and I've even asked him, I said, do you remember Jeremy? No. I said, okay.
So as a parent, you sought therapy for yourself because obviously it was traumatic for you as well. Would you classify it as PTSD after the fact? Or how did the therapy help you cope with it?
Well, when something traumatic, no one can tell you it's trauma or not. only you. So someone else can think that's not traumatic when you can say it is, and they can say, oh my God, that's traumatic, and you say, no, it's not. So I went to therapy more to deal with this fact that I thought this person was like family. And yet I kind of felt like I not allowed this to happen, but I didn't prevent it. Even though there was no way, you know, it's because at the time when things like this happen, you get the people, the Monday morning quarterbacks and the people that know nothing saying, well, that's why I never let anybody but family babysit my kid. Yeah. And it's like, well, guess what? Family is more likely than a stranger.
That's right. Statistically, that's true.
Yeah.
Right?
And second off, this person was supposedly, which I found out after the fact, supposed to be vetted. When I worked for the regional center, I had a 2-hour interview, was vetted, background check, fingerprints, all that. Because his wife already worked there, he was never vetted. So, but I didn't know that. It was a regional center vendor company that used him. Regional center was great. They provided the therapy and all of that. But, you know, you still, even though you know, when people are saying things, it still makes you start to question, maybe I could have or should have or didn't, or did I? You know, the fact that I didn't do something that night, but I waited even though I took him from, you know, ever coming in our house again. Did I handle it right? So it was more to talk it all out with somebody and not let it spin in my head that I know I did the right thing. Yeah. So more of a confirmation that I did what I needed to do.
I'm actually really impressed how you looked for the signs, you were attentive to what was going on, and then once you heard something that was, and then the fact that you kept your emotions in check and asked generalized questions, and then it gave him the open space to be able to discuss it with you without the shame or the felt like he was ratting out somebody or that he did something wrong himself. That took, I mean, you're a psychologist, but as a human being, that takes an amazing amount of awareness to take all those components and then remove yourself from the situation that you are so intimately involved in. That is something that I don't know how you have the mental strength to be able to do that.
I do want to say for people that one of the hardest things to do is to ask non-leading questions. You know, because and I knew, thankfully, and I knew this from my training, not to ask. And so anybody hopefully never has to be in this situation, but you don't ask, where did they touch? What did they touch? But it's like, or did they touch you? You know, I would say to my son, show me what happened. Mm-hmm. Tell me. And it's hard as a parent because you want to say, did they do this? Did they do that? Don't, because that recording was used as evidence and as proof. So hopefully no one has to ever go through this. But if you do, it is hard to because I had training, it was still really hard for me to put that in gear of, okay, don't panic. Just ask questions.
I think that's got to be the most important part in terms of helping people that are going through the same thing, right? Like, so let's say that you did use leading questions during the time that you did the recording. Would that have negated that as legal evidence because of the nature of the way that you asked the question? Does that make sense?
It could, yeah, it very possibly could. It may not negate it, but it's going to shine some doubt on it. Like, you manipulated this in some way. Unintentionally, but it still manipulated it.
Yeah.
And it put the suggestion. Yes.
That daycare?
Absolutely.
Where all the parents, I think, kind of almost conspired,
yeah,
from what my understanding is. Yep. And then later on, they were found not guilty, I think, in that case. But thank goodness, too, because if they were truly innocent, man, can you imagine? That's another scary thing about prisons, to think about how many innocent people are in there. But that's a different thing. I'll hit you up on another time. But so along with controlling your emotions as advice to somebody who's going through a similar experience that you're going through, what are maybe 3 points or however many points you think would be good advice to give somebody that's going through the same thing you are, or that you did at least?
Believe children. Believe children. They may tell magical stories. They rarely outright lie. Mm-hmm. You know, they may tell you something to try to get out of trouble, like, you know, the dog ate my homework kind of thing, or I don't know how that got there. The magic fairy put it there. You know, but they're not going to.
I've never heard that before.
as far as somebody touched me inappropriately type of a thing, they do not lie. They do not lie. Believe children. That is the probably most important thing I can say is, please believe the child. If somebody is telling you that someone is inappropriate, believe them. And there's a lot of people, because I saw it in prison all the time, that inmates had been molested as kids and nobody believed them. And even if they, you know, like it was the mom's brother, the uncle, it's like it split. And I know people that this has happened. It splits the family apart because people don't want to believe that the uncle could ever do that.
Yeah.
So the kid must be lying. No.
Oh my gosh. For people that are going through this, what are the support groups out there? Who can they reach out to in terms of emotionally dealing with these type of situations?
I think there's a place called Darkness to Light, I believe is the name of it, that I got a lot of information from when I was going through this. So you just look up Darkness to Light, and it's for children that have been sexually abused.
Okay.
And so there's a lot of resource on there. And go to therapy. Don't be afraid of going to therapy. And even if you think, no, I'm good.
You're not good. It's a traumatic
No,
situation.
you got to process it. Yeah. The one thing that I do know based on all of my history in psychology, all of my work with people in general, and currently in private practice, one of the most helpful things for people who have been through SA is when somebody believes them. Just those words of "I believe you" are extremely healing, or heading toward the path of healing, because even women, not just children, but even women,
sexual assault,
yeah, I cannot tell you how many people are more traumatized today because nobody believed them. So I know that has helped my son a lot, that I believed him from day one and I never doubted. So being able to tell someone, even if someone ever tells you their story and you're like, you know, well, why were you wearing that dress in your head? Okay, that's victim blaming for one,
right.
But I believe you means so much. I can't tell you how many people have told me that's just like this weight off of, oh my God, somebody actually is listening and hearing me and not telling me, for example, you shouldn't have worn that, or you shouldn't have had a babysitter at your house, or this is why I'm a helicopter parent,
right,
or stuff like that.
Yeah,
so
you shouldn't have to, nobody should have to worry about being a victim of a crime.
At all.
At all.
Yeah.
It's a ridiculous thing. So as far as the legal system went and law enforcement, how was that process? Do you feel it could be improved upon? Do you feel like they were very attentive to what Sean's needs were and what the crime was and how to put it together? What was your experience with law enforcement?
Okay, I hate the legal system in general. However, in this particular case, they were amazing. He got a detective that I am still in contact with to this day. I will hit him up just to say hi, and whenever I need help. Sean was going through something in high school, and he is no longer with the LAPD, but he's, I think, in Arizona now or something. But I hit him up, and he connected me up with someone at the LAPD, because my son, being developmentally delayed, was a victim of bullying in a bad way by quote unquote friends telling him to do things that were inappropriate. Yeah. So I took him to the LAPD. So this is another thing. I took him to the LAPD, and they gave him a tour of what happens with sex crimes, what happens from day one to whatever. And he walked out of there just
scared straight.
Yeah, because I'm like, you are going to be 18 years old. So that's another thing, is I try to be proactive, and parents can do this. You can call up the police department. At least I believe that you can, because I called up my detective friend that helped Sean and said, hey, how can I? And I really do think they need more scared straight type programs, but more for people who aren't in any trouble, but just to say, hey, this is what can happen. So let's show you the process of. And, you know, not wait until you're a kid getting into trouble all the time and then we're going to scare you straight. But like when they would take people for driver's ed, sometimes I never did this, but some classes went to the morgue and showed you drunk driver victims. That was pretty scary,
Yeah.
you know, but to take people who are, you know, I hate to be sexist, but especially males.
Well, I mean, that's not a.
Yeah. To a jail and show them, okay, this is what happens with a sex crime. Not that you can't be a victim of a sex crime being a male. I'm not saying that. But since males are the ones that typically do sex crimes against females,
Right.
This is what happens. So before you ever even send an unsolicited picture, let's go to what can come from that.
Yeah.
I think education is greatly needed. And I think with the justice system with my son, the one thing that I think was the worst part of it was the fact that I get it. The accused is always supposed to be able to face their accuser.
Mhm.
Yeah. But they don't want to put kids on the stand and put them through that potential trauma.
Right.
So like I said, he got 17 to 20 years. I had no say in the matter. They just called me and said, okay, we're plea bargaining. And I'm like, but, can't I do anything about it? They said no. And I feel that they should take the video, because they do an interview with the kids. I think every place will do that, I think. They should play that.
Yeah.
Because I think that kids' voices need to be heard, because a lot of people don't. Sex offenders, child molesters, they're not going to be rehabilitated.
Yeah, it's got to be such a difficult thing, because I think when it comes to, like, let's say the relationships between district attorneys and police officers, like they're working in completely two different fields of I don't want to say
Arrest
combat, but
and then
yeah,
conviction,
right.
yeah.
But in order to get a conviction, you need so many legal elements to prove beyond a reasonable doubt in the criminal sense, where and I think that's where the disconnect sometimes between police officers and district attorneys happens, because they're in the field, they're dealing with a situation that's happening right now, and they have to react in a way that most of us
Yeah.
just can't. And then a lot of the times, the police officers are not necessarily in the heat of the moment thinking about specific elements that lead to a conviction. And then sometimes the district attorney's like, well, oh my goodness, you know, we need this, that. and the
This
other
didn't
thing.
happen, you didn't do
Right,
that, you didn't do that. It's
exactly.
like, so we have no case
And
or
then
whatever, yeah.
It becomes a disconnect of where's the justice, and that ends up being a really interesting conundrum. But yeah, that's got to be a crazy experience to have to accept that plea deal, just based on the fact that we do have certain structures in place.
When I was in prison and I would look at when they were sex offenders and they would come in, I would look at how much time they got. And sometimes I would get super angry because they got a lot of time. And I would be like, and other times I would be super angry because they didn't get a lot of time. I got to read, whenever you go to prison, whenever you're arrested and convicted, there is a probation report. There is supposed to be a probation report, which I know it sounds weird because you're going to prison, not out of prison, but this probation report tells all the details of the crime. And it is supposed to be very detailed, but you can get half-assed written reports. Like we all know, paperwork is the bane of most people's existence, and this is paperwork. But it's supposed to tell. Like I have read some really good probation reports, and then I've read some really bad ones, and then there's sometimes not even in there.
Huh.
But in the report, I got to read, and this is something that the public doesn't necessarily, I think we know it on the one hand, but we don't necessarily. Like when my son was going through all of this, they did press conferences because this guy, Jeremy, had worked with LAUSD. He had worked with the regional center. He had worked with a lot of different people. So they did press conferences to try to see if there were more victims. The press conferences ran all day. And all the parents were like, oh, no. It can't be right. Until the detective said, no, he confessed.
Huh.
Because we want to deny, and the parents were like, well, that didn't happen to my kid. Because we want to deny that it would ever happen to our kids. But with the news, and this is something to keep in mind, I think we all know this in the back of our minds, but they don't tell you everything.
Sure.
Like, I was watching the press conference, and they were up at Devonshire Division, and they're like, just a few days ago, a mom walked up these stairs with her son. And I didn't even know it was our press conference because I'm like, no, the police came to our house. We never went to the police station. And they showed this street, which I'm glad, they said I lived in a different city that I lived in. And so which was also good.
Yeah.
But when I read the probation report, I'm like, this isn't really 100% accurate.
The news
So-
has become an interesting part of what we call theater.
That's a whole other. But when it comes to like writing reports and stuff, I'm reading it going, this isn't entirely accurate. Because it'll say like, I said this, or they told me, and I'm like, no, I told them. And then they said this, just little things, nothing that changed the crime. But that's where this disconnects sometimes. It's like, those things can change the conviction. So, again, our memories aren't accurate. It's just, I just don't like the idea that they plea bargain with sex offenders. That I don't like.
I think that you're probably not alone in that. Most
Yeah.
people are probably going to say, yeah, that's crazy that happened. But you also had your own experience with, you mentioned earlier, with toxic relationships and narcissism. I think you even have a tattoo that might represent that, right? Do you have that? That's right, the handcuffs one. Okay.
Yes.
What does that tattoo denote?
Okay.
And lead us through this.
So, my husband passed away in 2000. And it was my and my husband, I mean, when you talk about soulmates and just, kind of, he was my best friend, he was my partner, he was everything. And he was like my first like real relationship. I had dated, but my first real relationship. So after he had passed away, I like dated, but it was like, I didn't know, I want to say. I wish I could say I didn't know any better. So I met him at work. He's an officer at work. And we went out, and I was like, oh, I think I'm in a relationship now, because we kept dating. But I did not realize at the time, someone had told me he was Asperger's, which is now part of the autism spectrum as of 2013. Before 2013, pervasive developmental disorder and Asperger's were their own separate diagnoses. Today, they're all part of the autism spectrum. So he was Asperger's, someone told me, and he still might be. And I used that to excuse everything. Everything. And even though part of me knew, but then my friend was in a relationship where we were like, oh my God, they're using, our texts were identical, except for change the name. They were both assholes, and it just started getting worse and worse, and the lies. And if you've ever been in a toxic relationship, narcissist gets thrown around nowadays. Everybody's a narcissist. An asshole's a narcissist. No, NPD, narcissistic personality disorder, is different. Narcissistic personality disorder, which when we split up, we started going out in 2008 in April. We split up in January of 2018. And that's when I started really, because I was looking into narcissism and dealing with narcissism.
So he was clinically then.
I started looking at all the criteria, and I'm like, he's a narcissist.
So tell us, like,
NPD.
what would be a textbook definition of, like, if I were to ask you, what is a narcissism? What is
Narcissists are people that, okay, if you're ever in a relationship where you start to question your own reality, literally, your own sanity, literally, there's something there. But narcissists are people, narcissistic personality disorder. We all have traits and tendencies of narcissism at any point in time. But people that have NPD are those that at some point in their childhood, real or perceived, and if they perceived it, it's real, did not get the love that they felt they deserved. And again, it's all biopsychosocial. So they didn't get the love that they feel they deserved, and they are constantly now looking for it. But they'll never find it, because how do you know what 6-year-old love from your mom was?
Mm-hmm.
You don't know. So they're constantly trying to find it. They are very self-loathing. They do not like themselves. So what they do is surround themselves by people who are of better stature, professionally, personally, looks-wise, financially, because if those people like me, I must be a good person, see? But what they do is they're interpersonal exploitative relationships. The relationship is, what can you do for me? How can you elevate me? Feed me. They have what's called supply. And supply is anybody. Oh, she looked at me. She like, that's supply right there. She just smiled at me. Wow. That's supply. That customer service rep who just asked me how my day was and seemed interested and talked to me, they were actually flirting with me. That's supply. So everything is supply to them. And you're supply. And supply is whatever feeds that sadly black hole that can never be fed. And so I'm utilizing you. I'm exploiting you or exploiting you until you're now of no worth to me because I found somebody else that can. But trust me, they've always been there. I've just kept them on the side. And now that I'm done with you, I'm going to go to them. But I'm not done with you. You're on hiatus because I will come back to you. And there is a circle of, they will listen to you probably the first, few dates, because I have people asking me all the time, how did I miss the red flags? Was I stupid?
So the cause of it then is
biopsychosocial.
And it has to do with maybe not receiving the type of love that you would normally experience when you were younger or you were.
That's what they feel, that there was something. And I know my ex would tell me, he told me at the end that his dad would just leave the family for months at a time. His dad was abusive, but also his uncles would call him fatty. And it's like, I don't know how much of this is true, because another thing with MPD is their whole life is a lie. So there's some kernel of truth in what they say, but it's all wrapped around a lie. And it's trying to decipher that it's like, it's just mind numbing and don't do it. But they will listen to you when you first meet them. And they'll mirror you. And they'll be just good enough. Like, it's like, oh, like my husband was my rock, my emotional rock. I didn't need him there like a guardrail. It's not going to keep me on the road, but I feel safer with it there. It's like, oh, well, I want to be your rock. And now I'd be like, no, but at that time it's like, well, that's so sweet. So they'll say stuff that's just good enough to wrap you in, but they'll also at the same time be telling you who they are. Like he would say, at work, so many people there's infidelity on every yard. There's baby mama here, wife there. You don't even want to know. But he seemed like he was on his own, and he was so nice and sweet and all that. And I remember he would say to me, I'm not a good person. And I'm like, oh my God, you are. Look at everybody else. But he was not a good person. He would say that, or he'd say, yeah, I've never been in a healthy relationship. My psycho ex. Oh my God, as soon as someone says psycho ex to me,
like maybe this guy's actually
red flag.
Yeah, exactly.
But so they will do that. And you're like I did. No, you're no. He showed me a text from his ex that was like, holy crap, psycho. The text that led her to that exchange. Gotcha. So that's what they'll do. And then once they have you, it's like, then they start doing things with control. Like pushing boundaries. They'll be 10 minutes late. Oh, I was getting gas. And then they'll be an hour late. And then they'll just blow you off completely because you accepted the 10 minutes. You accepted the hour. And now that we're something, you accepted me blowing you off too. So they disrespect you. They totally disintegrate your boundaries. But then it's also the honeymoon period. Then they love bomb you. It's love bombing, gaslighting, mind fucking, hovering, all of those things. Devalue and demean you and degrade you.
So did he ever accept the fact that he's a narcissist, or is there a specific way that you can diagnose narcissism yourself?
Yeah, you can diagnose narcissism. I mean, they don't go to therapy. NPD does not go to therapy. They will go to therapy to prove that they are not the problem. I had, when I was an intern, my pre-doctoral internship, I had my very first true narcissist, true NPD. And my office had a two-way mirror that was to my supervisor's office. And so everybody would cram in there. It was small to watch our sessions. My colleague had his wife, and I would handle it so differently now, but he was like, yeah, I'm going to Mexico with another lady to see a concert because my wife doesn't want to. Why should I? Why should I go with her? She doesn't like the music. She never asked me. It's like, because she's your wife and you don't do that with another woman. Well, if she wanted to go, she should ask. That's your wife. I mean, it was like, it was.
So there's this disconnect.
Yeah, like it's only about them. Well, now I would handle that differently because now I can tell. I've worked with narcissists. I've had narcissists. Now I can tell. My spidey narcissist sense goes off because what I do now is educate people on it and try to help people to get out of it.
Awareness.
Yeah.
You could just spot them from a mile away.
Yeah.
So when you do diagnose somebody with narcissism, or you know somebody that's a narcissist, like how do you treat that type of affliction?
You can't. Honestly, you can't. There is this new trend of what's called self-aware narcissists. And that is a made-up trend, and I will fight people, and I do fight people on this. But it was made up
I just don't believe it.
It was made up by people who self-diagnose themselves as MPD and then self-diagnose themselves as self-aware MPD. They're neither NPD nor are they self-aware, because a true self-aware just means I know that I am doing this to you. I know I'm abusing you, and I don't care. So if you want to talk about a self-aware narcissist, stay even further away from them, because they're admitting that they know exactly what they're doing. Narcissists don't, and I mean NPD when I say narcissists don't care. They don't care. When I have someone in therapy that's a narcissist, I will refer them out. I cannot work with them. I had a couple where the husband was reeking of NPD. Luckily, I wasn't there to treat. Yeah. And I said to the wife, I can't diagnose him because he only came once. Yeah. However, he has high traits and tendencies. And based on everything that you've told me, they're separated. They're divorced now. Sorry. But yeah, there's no treating them because it's not them. When I told my ex, I said, I thought you were Asperger's, you're narcissist, you're MPD. He's like, okay, so what do I do about that? And I said, he goes, let's go to therapy then. And I said, okay, I'll go to therapy with you. And he goes, but don't expect anything to change. I'm like, it won't, trust me, it won't, but maybe you'll gain some insight into why you do it and maybe not do it. That was a stretch too. We went to therapy one time and he lied the very first question of, what's your birth date? He lied. He lied. I was just like, whoa, wow. The very first question and you're already lying in therapy. This is going to go well.
Oh my God.
That
has got to be.
Don't lie in therapy.
Unnerving to say the least. So the last part I wanted to ask you about was kind of political, social, but we have things like the most recent school shooting, and then with I think it was a transgender female that ended up doing the shootings. We have Trump and January 6th, and now he's indicted, and it just seems like now also with the Aiden Fucci situation. And like a lot of countries have guns, a lot of countries have, of course, their own problems, but we seem to have the unique ability not to actually logically solve and not to recognize, like we've become tribal in so many different ways, and there are so many different teams that people are on. And like especially with the school shootings, it seems to be symptomatic of something that's a lot deeper than just gun violence or just mental health. So from a psychologist's perspective, and this is a hard question, if you had to diagnose America, our society, our fabric of society, what would you clinically prescribe, so to speak, in terms of a step forward in making things better for the future?
I think we're a hot mess. Emphasis on the mess, not the hot. The one thing, though, I know you didn't ask this, but I have to say this. I have to, because this is a huge pet peeve of mine. Mental illness is not the cause of gun violence. You didn't say this. I'm just saying it. Because every time there is gun violence, it's mental illness. The mentally ill are typically and statistically the victims of gun violence, not the perpetrators.
How interesting. I never
Yes.
knew that.
And oftentimes, when it is someone that's mentally ill, it is violence toward themselves, as in suicide. Not to say it can never happen.
Sure.
Now, a disturbed person full of hate and rage is not a mentally ill person. Disturbed and hateful and bigoted and racist and transphobic and anti-Semitic and all of that is not a mental illness. Hate is not a mental illness. They may have issues with their mental health, their thought process, but it's not a mental illness. So when the first thing that's picked upon is mental health, for one, you're getting me on my soapbox here. For one, there needs then more mental health care. Because these are the same people that cry it's mental health, that cut mental health funding. Okay, mental health clinicians, psychologists, not psychiatrists, psychologists, therapists, master's level therapists, we do not make and are not as respected as we should be. Psychiatrists, they prescribe pills. So that's in a different category. They very rarely do therapy. There are some that do, but they very rarely do. I'm talking about people that do therapy. We have to talk people. I've talked people off the proverbial ledge, literally. I was in a room with someone who barricaded themselves with a knife, who was going to off her, the dean of the school and herself. And I went in there. It was just the two of us. And I had to talk her into giving me the knife and then going and getting more help. But mental health is not taken seriously until it is serious. And if you're going to sit there and accuse all these shootings on mental health, then raise the funds for mental health. Instead, they're cutting them left and right.
But what you're saying, though, is that mental health, as it relates to what's going on with gun violence or society, is a non sequitur. You're saying that the hate, the bigotry, the anti-Semitism, all of those type of things are separate from mental health.
Yeah.
So I guess then, when we're talking about the things that probably cause or lead people to do the gun violence, and it not being mental health, then how would one create an environment where hate can be, what are the components? I mean, I'm sure education's a very broad and almost a cliche statement nowadays, but there has to be some way of saying, look, we're all in this together,
Yeah.
this type of ideology is obviously leading nobody anywhere. Is there a way, or in your mind, is it more sociological than psychological?
Yeah. I truly believe it is more sociological because then it affects individual psychology. It's like a cult. There are people that are literally fanatics and worship and almost pray to people. What?
Yeah.
Why? And I'm sorry, but when you're a Republican wearing an AK-47 tie clip the day after a school shooting, read the room. But they don't care because it's not the gun, it's the person. And the person was sick. They were transgender. And no, transgender is not a mental illness. It is biological. But let's blame that. Let's not accept accountability and responsibility. Now, there are people that will be psychotic and paranoid. And in the prison, we had what's called a 115, a write-up. When you had a behavioral issue, you got written up. And then if they were in mental health, we would have to go and interview them to see how much their mental health was the cause of the behavioral issue. And this is a lot like society in general. And when you talk about guns and mental health and stuff. So we would go and talk to them. And more often than not, mental health had nothing to do with it. They would say, but I'm stressed. I'm sorry, just because you're stressed does not mean you can beat the shit out of someone and assault them.
Sure.
Okay? No, that's not a mental health issue. Now, when it might be a mental health issue is I had somebody, for example, the one time that I put mental health might have played a factor in it when they were psychotic, heard voices, and their medication ran out. and they kept putting in referrals for medication refills.
And they didn't get their medication.
And they didn't get the medication,
episode.
and they thought somebody was the devil, and they beat them up.
Hmm.
Now, they didn't need to beat them up. There were other things they could have done. So mental health played a factor. I can't guarantee that your voices were what made you beat that person up.
Right.
But because you have a history of and put in that you weren't getting your medication, I can say, it's a probability that this was why you beat the guy up. So when you say mental health, just because you're stressed or angry or depressed doesn't mean you go and shoot people and kill them.
Mm-hmm. Is there a point where psychology and sociology intersect?
Mm-hmm.
And,
There are social psychologists.
And in that point, is there a methodology in terms of dealing with what we're going through as a society? Or is it just too broad of too many facets or parts of it to actually make a general statement about?
I honestly thought I understood human behavior. I'm supposedly, and I am supposed to be an expert in human behavior. When someone has a PhD, that makes them an expert in their field. So a PhD plus a license should make you an expert in human behavior. And these past few years, I might boggle my mind. Because when you have, talk about gaslighting across the board. And I'm not, before anyone gets pissed off, I'm not talking a left or a right, because both spectrums,
Sure.
But when you have people that literally are tone deaf, when you have somebody that is talking about transgender and saying that they're grooming children, but meanwhile, you have charges pending against you,
Hypocrisy with it all.
Again, this goes back to when you asked me about getting into psychology and how it just clicked with me. I sit here thinking, can't people see this? How is this not making sense to you? How is the math is not mathing. If you see 2 and 2, you're not getting 4. What is going on? And our society is so messed up that 2 and 2 isn't always equaling 4, and people can justify it.
Yeah, we don't have baseline facts.
No, and we don't need them. And people have fallen, sadly, on both sides into, I am going to believe and I am not going to do my research and I'm not going to do my critical thinking. Critical thinking is lacking. There you go. Critical thinking is lacking immensely in our country right now.
Sure. Yeah, critical thinking is something that it seems to be such a missing component.
Even my inmates were
discussing.
learning critical. I taught a critical thinking group to my inmates, and they're amazing, and they wanted to learn. You bring critical thinking up to some people, I don't want to know that I could possibly be wrong.
Yeah,
So I'm going to pretend you're not even saying it.
it does something to their world vision in
Yeah.
a sense where it almost implodes on itself. And I've had conversations like that where challenged a certain frame of thinking, and I could see, like, my friends, his ears got hot,
Yeah.
he was getting angry right away. I knew to back off the conversation, but it was interesting that he couldn't even engage in the dialogue because it just shocked his worldview too much, and it sent him into, I guess, a fear-based emotion at least. So.
And social media is amazing and awesome and wonderful, but it's also very counter in
It has its other side.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's bad side. And I know that now. I love Gen Z. My son's Gen Z. And Gen Z is amazing and has done some amazing things. But when it comes to mental health, I'm terrified. I'll be honest, I'm terrified. Because I go toe-to-toe with Gen Zs right now about the DSM. And know the DSM, it's our diagnostic and statistical manual. It's what we have to use to diagnose.
Mhm.
And yes, it was written by psychiatrists for one, who do not practice for two,
Are they trying
who
to
are
rewrite
mainly
it?
male they just put out a new edition in 2022. But Gen Z is like, we go beyond the written into the spiritual. And it's like, okay, that is great. I had someone literally tell me that. I'm like, that's great, but I'm sorry, but that's not how we can diagnose. It's not. And you will have 16, 17, 18-year-olds saying that they're NPD, BPD, ASPD, ADHD, and ASD, and bipolar, all at the same time. It's like a badge of honor. Mental health right now is a badge of honor. Whereas people who truly have these things are really suffering.
Yeah.
And so it's like, you don't have any personality disorder yet.
Hopefully it comes back around where the mental health definition is clear and the people who need the help get it.
It's either glamorized or oh my God, I'm so sorry. It's either glamorized or stigmatized. And we need to we'll never get in the middle.
Right. There's no such thing
But-
as perfect, but there should be some pursuit of it.
When you have the Kardashians who say, I have to take a Xanax to get on an airplane. I have anxiety disorder. No, you can be anxious without an anxiety disorder.
Sure.
You can be sad. That's not depression.
Mhm.
We all have our quirks. You can multitask. That's not ADHD.
Gotcha.
So we're on social media is on the glamorizing part right now.
All right. Well, Dr. Larman, I can't thank you enough for doing this interview. I could go on for hours talking.
And I can talk for hours as well. You know
So
that.
We'll have to do another time. I'm going to pick out a whole new subject list, and we're going to hit it again. Maybe we'll do like a celebrity one, or we take each of the most recent ones and
talk about them.
Talk about each one and what your opinion.
We
is
could
on
do a
that.
podcast too.
Exactly. But send me your links underneath this video. We're going to have all the links to Dr. Larman, all the shows that she's on, and all the books or writings that she wants to send a link to, or post a link with, and we'll get that information out to everybody. And then again, another very heartfelt special thank you for doing this.
You are
Above
very
and beyond.
welcome.
Thank you so much.
Anytime.